So, Congressman, we now know we've heard from the Foreign Secretary. The British government is willing to break with its original treaty obligations on Northern Ireland trade. So, what is your message from Washington on that?
Well, essentially, the answer isn't breaking international law in solving the protocol issue. The parties haven't been at the table together since February. It was last February they had the privilege to meet with Secretary Truss, with the Speaker of our House in Congress, Speaker Pelosi. And both of us in that meeting, although it was centered on Ukraine, took significant time to bring up our concerns. My concerns were that there's an urgency to get to the table and resolve this, particularly before the May elections. Now, the May elections results just reinforced the fact that it was roughly, I think it was 59% of the people of the success and the victories there were centered around the issue of agreement with the protocol. So, I mean, now we have that election as a reinforcement, yet a devolved government that devolved ostensibly with Donaldson's move in response to the protocol. So we don't have a government. Now we have elections. And this is an issue that I think an approach that will make things worse and widen matters rather than bring people together. And from the US, it really undercuts significantly the Good Friday Agreement, which we were a great part of.
Now, the British government are clear in what they say. They say they don't want to break the deal. They don't want to dump the deal and break with those early obligations. They want a negotiated compromise. So what do you say to that? Why should the British government listen to you? What would be the cost of ignoring your advice?
Well, don't make me the sole arbiter. I'm here
in your
trying
opinion,
to be the voice of America in Congress, and I think I am. A bipartisan majority in Congress feel the same way I do. It's not clear. Your statement is, they're quite clear. How can you be clear when you're breaking an international agreement saying you're not breaking an international agreement? Now, the way forward is not to break the agreement, but to get back to the table and work these things out in earnest with some urgency.
Now, what would be the cost then to the British government, to this country, in not taking your advice?
Well, again, in not proceeding the way that they have already signed in and agreed ahead of time, I'd rather reframe it that way.
Sure.
But I'll tell you most immediately and most importantly is what the EU is saying. And they're saying they will take every means at their disposal if this is broken to react to it and to come back. And that just widens problems, because what is at their disposal, the EU? They can sit there and bring infringement proceedings or a very lengthy and drawn out settlement process through the courts. They can impose targeted tariffs on the UK, and they can terminate, UK-EU trade and cooperation agreements. Also, different agreements they have on research projects together. So the cost of this approach is to widen the gap. And from Congress's here in the US, from our perspective, in the middle of this is very significant collateral damage is the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay, so look, the government position on that is that they want to avoid a trade war, but they're prepared to do this if they feel they are driven to that, and that could lead to a costly trade war. It's hard to dispute that because that seems to be the plain truth. From Washington's point of view, I wonder what could be the cost. What could be the cost, if there was a cost, in terms of Britain, the United Kingdom, standing in the eyes of America, in the eyes of Washington, D.C. and the Biden administration?
Well, the UK is, if not our closest ally, among our closest allies. That's historic in modern times. And we hate to see any kind of interplay that's widening a gap between the EU and the UK beyond Brexit itself. But the ramifications here are quite clear. And I don't mean this in any way as a threatening sense. I can just tell you as a more than observer, participant in government here, and this is on the House side in particular, the voices of the Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi, of the chair of the committee that deals with our negotiation on free trade agreements, all free trade agreements, have been very clear. And I think they speak for the majority of House members that if this occurs, moving forward with the UK-US trade agreement will be scuttled in the process. And that's just the reality of what will happen here. So again, not a threat, but a reality check. The point is, there's an option going back to the table. You know, I've also been in contact with EU officials through this whole process over the years, moving them forward. Just in the last week, meeting with Simon Coveney, and they expressed their flexibility in moving forward at the negotiating table. Now, one of the things that will be a problem will be the jurisdiction over how to resolve disputes. And clearly, the EU is an entity, and it's their sovereign ability and their responsibility to be the final governor of those. And that's a stumbling block that I think just has to be resolved. The rest of the things I think can be worked out. And you know, there's already discussions and you've already seen movement. I think some of the posturing I've seen that, oh, the EU hasn't done anything contradicts just what has been happening. They have made concessions. They have dealt with the cultural differences. A good example is the sausage and the cultural differences with that and how that's being treated. So there is movement on that side. This image of an intractable EU, I don't think is correct. And I just hope very strongly that for the sake of the West and the sake of everything we're working together on right now and solidarity, certainly that these things are resolved. But from the US perspective, at the heart of this is the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah. But when you then point to the Good Friday Agreement, are you then saying that Boris Johnson and his ministers are putting at risk peace in Northern Ireland needlessly? Because that's a serious suggestion to make. The British government if I may, Congressman, the British government, the British government say they will not restore any kind of border on the island of Ireland, which would clearly be a breach of the Good Friday Agreement. They say they will not be the ones to do that.
But in effect, see, we're dealing with semantics here, and that's not productive. In effect, moving away from the protocol will indeed result in that, and they know that. So this is not one reason I brought it up in February with Secretary Truss at that time is my grave concern. In the committee that I chair, we've had 2 meetings about what's been going on in Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement. And both of them have not only said that there's implementation that's undone, but they both commented very seriously on the uptick in violence that's occurring there and the unrest. So indeed, there is an urgent reason to move forward on this. And it's something that should be done at the negotiation table, not circumventing an international agreement that UK agreed to and signed on to themselves.
Yeah, look, on this point, before we move on, the UK government is absolutely clear they will not build a new barrier across the island of Ireland. There will not be a physical border. The Republic of Ireland say the same thing. And given that Dublin and London agree on that, how could there be a border?
There'll be, instead of a negotiated protocol where this is resolved, there will be an open space in negotiations that invariably will result on the checks that occur. Just think for a second. There was a reason that there was a protocol agreement. And that reason was, in the absence of this kind of action, there would indeed be border issues and a hard border eventually. So you could say you're not going to do it, but you're actually doing it while you're saying you're not going to do it. And this is the kind of rhetoric we have to move away from. I find it counterproductive myself. I'm urging both sides to get back to the table and to resolve these issues. Some of the issues must be respected. And the one that comes to mind, again, is the one who the court of final jurisdiction. And any country, the UK would never in any agreement do away with their own overall ability to do this. And that's why the protocol was necessary. The protocol was the solution to resolving the difference. To pull away from the protocol opens up the differences again. This is quite common sense.
Right. I may come back to the question of the European Court of Justice in a moment, but just picking up on your point about trade from the American perspective there, the view from Washington, D.C. You say if Britain were to go down this route, it would effectively wreck any possibility of a UK-US trade deal. But it was never a priority under Joe Biden. It's become less of one since then. It's pretty much vanished over the horizon, to the point that the British government are now looking at bilateral trade deals with maybe 20 mainly Republican-controlled states. So that surely is an empty threat, Congressman. And it's my word, not yours. An empty argument.
I was going to say that's not a threat, but indeed there was a great deal of discussion. I've had MPs here over the last few years, and it was a high point of discussion. I'm not aware that it's no longer a priority of the UK to move in that direction. And I'm not aware that it's not a priority of the US as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's critical and worked hard to have free trade agreements among Western countries, particularly our transatlantic friends in the US. I think that's where we get strength against the challenge of China. So these are things I think people would like to see. Free trade agreements among the Democratic Party traditionally have been very difficult, just regardless of who is involved, to get through legislatively. What was hopeful to me, among many other people who are not free traders by nature, is in spite of that overall history, we could carve out agreements with our transatlantic allies. And together we will be stronger against the greater threat right now imposed by China. And so if the UK doesn't consider that a priority, it's a priority here, I can tell you. And there's a window where we can act on this because they're very difficult to negotiate here and to get through in Congress. And you need Democratic votes to do it. In the case of UK, in the case of the transatlantic allies, the EU, these are things I thought showed great promise.
Yes.
We could move forward on, and we mutually benefit by it. So I don't agree with the premise that it's no longer significant to either party.
Okay, look, in the light of Ukraine and the Ukraine war, Western alliances are more important than they've been for very, very many years. Britain and the USA have a close relationship militarily. American and the British intelligence apparatus work very, very closely together. That closeness is not going to be changed by the argument over Northern Ireland, is it, Congressman?
No, I mean, the sharing of intelligence and security issues will not change, nor should it, I hope.
So where will the damage come? What could be damaged?
Well, the first damage is across the Atlantic between the EU and the UK. And as anyone that,
I mean with America, if I may.
Okay.
Where would that damage occur?
Okay, I would say this. The fact that that's damaging is a concern of the US because both the EU and the UK are our close allies. So that's not insignificant, and that's a concern here. We're not anyone that's watches the issues, cares about the issues, understands the importance of these alliances, would be concerned with that, number one. So it is a concern. In terms of the US legislative actions, the trade agreement would be a casualty, and that's just a matter of fact, because it's not a great margin to move any free trade agreement forward.
Now tell me, there is a view in Brussels, in the European Union, that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are driven, maybe significantly, by domestic political considerations. Put it crudely, they are playing to their base, the Eurosceptic base in this country and in their parties. When you're nodding, Congressman, do you share that view?
Well, we have our own experience, and I'm familiar with it here, and I think that's probably an accurate observation as we witness it in our own country these days.
Again, I mean, that's an important political point. If you believe, as you say, that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, the British government, are being driven by a wish to play to the base for narrow domestic political reasons, you're saying they're playing a very dangerous game with geopolitical, economic considerations to make narrow party points. That's your point.
Well, I do think, and that's where I remain optimistic. I think overall, the overwhelming necessity to move forward and complete this negotiation, get it through, get it behind us, as it's a result of Brexit, another action by UK itself, and this was a way to resolve the Brexit issue, and it's intertwined with it. But in the middle of that intersection, the middle of that collision, is the Good Friday Agreement. And, you know, that's something that there's enormously strong feeling about in the US. It's one of the things I know myself when I go through the Middle East, around the world, into very countries that are in very dire straits with lack of hope of resolution. I would point to that time and time again as the agreement, the success story that proves that nothing is beyond hope. So we go forward, you know, supporting that. I think you'll see a delegation coming just in the next few days to Brussels, to Ireland. They'll reinforce this, but I don't think it needs no reinforcement. And just my greatest fears, as they were laid out to Secretary Truss just in February, are occurring. We have a new government. We have an overwhelmingly, I think it was 59% of the results of that election supported the protocol. So it's a minority viewpoint, even there. And that should be recognized as well.
Okay, let me just find it, because I'm taking far too much time. But let me just briefly put two very quick points to you. One is the UK government say you cannot have devolved government in Northern Ireland without the Democratic Unionists, and the Democratic Unionist Party say this deal must be dropped in its present form for them to contemplate going into government. How do you address that in a nutshell?
Get back to the table and form the government. You know, it's a power sharing agreement. It's just not an issue where one side wins, the other side loses. It's power sharing, and it's equal. And so you can't argue with that equality. So pulling away from this as some kind of tool or wedge issue or influence, devolving the government because you can't come to agreement on this, is abrogating your primary responsibility to govern itself.
Okay, last point. Do you imagine there could be some sort of role for an American intermediary, some sort of mediator? Senator George Mitchell had such an important role to play in the Good Friday Agreement. Is there any place now for a latter-day George Mitchell?
I don't think, you know, George Mitchell's not going to, as we say, be walking through the doors of salvation here. Part of the agreement was formed there was skill from George Mitchell certainly, but what really, and he would say the same thing, brought the people together was a will to get it done, the necessity to have a conclusion, the necessity to end the violence. And we have violence erupting again. And so it shouldn't be the necessity of, an iconic negotiator, if you will, coming forward. We should be able to do it ourselves. The people know the issue, and they should deal with that issue. But, you know, the issue of a great country like the UK taking an international agreement that they gave birth to themselves, they signed off to, and orphaning that agreement, and then undercutting it with domestic legislation. That's just not the way democracies have to work to be successful. We cannot have great democracies, great countries like UK and the countries in the European Union agree to an international agreement and just throw it away and deal with it. We had that's something that underscores everything at stake here. And the vehicle to go forward is to get to the table in earnest, not to invoke domestic legislation as a threat, which has resulted in the EU threatening back retaliation if that occurs. That is not a step forward. And in the meantime, we have a devolved government that's not in place at a critical time.
Congressman, it's been good to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.